Horizon is essentially Seth Walker being drawn to West Virginia, having to try and figure out why this plane just fell out of the sky, what might have caused its wing to fall off, and all the mysterious characters who were lurking around Wetzel County, West Virginia, who might have had something to do with it. So that's it. Thank you. Come on up and we'll talk.
We're now going to sing a duet. We'll take requests. So, anyway. Do you want to open it to questions?
Sure. Yeah, that's great. Do you guys have questions to start out with? Or we can ask each other questions, but yes, sir.
I'm just curious, could you, each of you just talk about kind of like, where do you find your inspiration for story? Like, are you taking notes? Is it moments? Is it constantly like ruminating in the back of your mind? Like can you just talk about your process as writers?
Sure.
That's a very big question.
I come to bookstores and I listen and I look at the people who are sitting here and I observe them very closely. And then ideas are everywhere. I mean, they're just everywhere. They're dripping from the air. It's the execution that's the harder. It's how to take some little spark or some tiny event that's happening and expand that into a gripping novel. The series that I'm writing, it's about an investigator. It's about someone who hunts serial predators, and each of the stories has been sparked by a true crime case, a real life, what they call an unknown subject, is what the FBI calls the people they're hunting. They don't know who they are. The first book was sparked by the Zodiac. I don't ever say inspired, because saying something was inspired by a ruthless killer is kind of weird. But the first book was inspired was sparked by the Zodiac. I grew up in Southern California, where I'm old enough to have seen a police drawing of him in the paper. You know, the black hood with the bizarre symbols, and asking my parents who this was, and having them have to explain to me what a serial killer was. The Into the Black Nowhere, that genesis was when I read The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule, which is about Ted Bundy, and how she was a true crime author who realized belatedly that this fellow she had spent years sitting side by side with at a crisis hotline, suicide prevention center, in the middle of the night in Washington State, was this guy Ted that the police have been hunting for years, who was not only counseling people in crisis on the phone, apparently very well, but was snatching college students off the street for his little hobby, which was murder. So I was just fascinated by the whole idea of how does someone pull the mask of sanity over their whole life, which is what Bundy did. I mean, he was a law student. He worked for the governor of Washington. It was suggested that perhaps he would have a bright political career, and maybe if he'd been smarter, he would have been even worse, because he could have been elected to something. But I just thought, how does someone get away with it, and how would an investigator who realizes what they're up against figure out a way to rip the mask off, get this extremely cunning, manipulative, charming person who has a seemingly ordinary life, a successful professional. How do you get them to expose who they really are, so that you can capture them? So, I spent around, sit a couple months thinking about that, and then start outlining and writing. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, it's a similar kind of process. It's a what if kind of scenario. So my hero, Seth Walker, spends all his time sort of like I do in airports and on airplanes. And so you start sitting around and you start thinking about what kinds of things happen in those settings, right? I had a bunch of people react to my very first book and say, well, I hope there's not a plane crash in it. I was like, well, clearly I got to put a plane crash in the second one, because that's what everyone wants to read about. And so the second you do that, I'm a technology lawyer, and so I sort of stay up on what the latest in tech is. And so I try and bring those two things together. And so, okay, there's going to be a plane crash. What kind of technology might be involved and might have been implicated? What weird setting, because Walker can go anywhere as an air marshal, he can go anywhere as an airport. What weird setting can we put him in that's like the most uncomfortable, crazy setting possible? You know,
West Virginia.
Yeah, the wilderness of Appalachia.
All my
sounds good.
in-laws are from West Virginia, so I can get away with things.
Yeah. You know, the first one happened in Austin, so we probably shouldn't go there. But no, so it's asking yourself what if and just sort of spinning the story out from there. And then, I don't know about you, I always end up, when I start the book, I don't know exactly every minute of the book, but I sort of know start and finish, and then some key things in between, and I kind of navigate between.
Yeah.
So,
Does that kind of help explain the process?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. It does, thank you.
Sure. Somebody else had a hand, or was that just somebody just scratching their head? This is not an auction we want.
so are you, so in book world, there's like pantsers, which are the people who write by the seat of their pants. And there's plotters who like write outlines as long as their books.
P-L-O-T-T, not P-L-O-D-D.
Right, right. So which do you find you're more like?
I plot because I've seen what happens when I don't. I end up so far up the creek with, you know, covered in bugs and with no paddle, no canoe, no machete to hack my way back out. It's just a disaster. So I need to know, like you said, the beginning, major turning points, the end. I've learned how to outline, basically write a treatment, just to kind of like a précis of the story, because then I know that will get to the most powerful ending, and I know that I've started in the right place.
Okay.
So, what about you?
Same thing. I mean, I have the start and the end, and like I said, a few key beats in between. Usually it's like an action sequence or something with the tech that's going to happen. And then I write a 2 to 4 page kind of little summary of what's going to happen, and that's what I turn in. And then that keeps me honest. Whenever I'm really lost, I go back to that and say, what was this supposed to be again? Oh yeah, that's what's supposed to be. And that gets me back.
But it's not a high school assignment either.
Right.
If you think of something better, more riveting, you can change it. You don't have to stick to the outline.
Right.
Joe, how'd you end up getting published? Did you send a treatment to a publisher? Did you have an agent? Did you finish your manuscript first?
Yes, like most folks, I wrote a full book and then submitted it to agents and got about 100 rejections. And then I wrote another book and I submitted that one to agents and got about 100 rejections. And then I wrote the third book,
Wow.
which is actually Takeoff, which is sitting over on the table. That one got me an agent, and then my agent got me a publishing deal. And from then on, they kind of know that you can do a book, and then you're kind of given, license to give them less. You give them a few chapters and a synopsis. But basically, the first time, yeah, you have to write the book, the whole book, and submit it, and you never know where it's going to go. So that's.
Yeah, kind of more or less the same thing. Yeah.
What pushed you to keep writing when such an extreme rejection?
I'm stubborn as hell, as most of you in this room know. And I enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoy the process. I enjoy sitting alone with a blank screen and sort of banging words together. That's fun to me. And so, I mean, I started doing it telling myself that I didn't really care if I got published. That probably wasn't completely true, but it was semi-true. And so it was fun enough. And you know from being at home with me that if I don't write, I'm a major grump. So to avoid being a major grump, I kept writing. So.
But what kind of research did you do on West Virginia, the area?
A few different things. So I spent my year in kindergarten in West Virginia. I lived there for a year. My best friend in high school and college lived in West Virginia, so I spent a lot of time there then. For this book, I hadn't been to that particular county, and so I took a trip and I drove, through the county and sort of got a sense of it. And that was really like the bulk of it. I had a few beta readers, the people who read early drafts that were try and make sure that I really did it justice. But that was kind of it.
What kind of drugs did you do to feed authentic?
Coffee.
Yeah, lots of coffee. That's true. That's true.
Is there a question over here?
Snapple.
I did, I was wondering about the favorite part of writing. What, you kind of mentioned some of that, but what do you enjoy most about the process, or finishing it, or the beginning?
For me, I have a couple of favorite parts of writing. One is the brainstorming, coming up with the ideas, because then it's just absolute freedom. You can just figure out how far, how extreme, how crazy you can make a story. You can, try to put together all kinds of bizarre connections to see whether that sparks more ideas. And it's, you can do that while you're staring out the window or you're watching a football game on Saturday as well. I also like revising. I find it extremely painful to get the first draft down. It's just to sit down and type it. I mean, some people love that. They say, woo, it's just like putting the top down in the car, and I just, head out, and I'll see where it takes me. For me, it's just kind of like, oh, God, I got to type 2,000 words today or something. But then once that's on the page, I get to make it better. You can fix terrible chapters. You can't fix a blank page. So I really enjoy being able to revise something, because that also tells me that I've got a bulk of the work already done. So then you get to, get to pull out the lipstick and fix it all up and do its hair and make it look pretty, make it look scary, make it, cut out all the slow parts and give the characters more secrets and more issues that they have to overcome. Throw a cliff in front of them where instead of going up just Highway 71, suddenly there's a who knows what, a twister comes across the road. So they've got to make a detour, that kind of thing. That's
Any rules for your characters or stereotypes you've sworn to avoid?
That's not one. You got one?
stereotype. I mean, there are plenty of stereotypes now. There's always going to be someone who's just started writing a crime novel. They go, I had this great idea. What if the detective has a drinking problem? No. The tired. You avoid that cliche. You avoid, the old cop is just about to retire. He has one more shift that he's got to get through today before he can go off to fish on his dock for the rest of his life. You just try to think of real people, and try to think of what, if you had real people and throw them into extraordinarily challenging circumstances, that's what you want to see. You want to discover how they would really react instead of just, putting some, stick figure on the page.
Yeah. I think real people are surprising.
Yes.
And so when I sit down to do characters, I purposefully, try and build some surprises in, just in terms of who they are versus what they do and things like that. This book, False Horizon, has an African-American FBI agent who was born in Lynch, Kentucky, because I like the sound of that. It has a female county sheriff from West Virginia. I try and play with at least a little bit to get off the stereotypes and give you people that you might really meet and be interested in spending some time with, because they're not who you think that person would be in that situation.
Yeah, it's our job to hold your attention,
Yeah.
get you to turn one more page. So we got to write about people who seem like they're as real to you as they feel to us.
And the voices in our heads. Yes. Yeah.
Can you each talk about your writing practice or your habits? I'm a big believer that a difference between a writer, someone who likes to write, is commitment to the craft, consistency. Can you talk about what does your writing schedule look like? How frequently do you write? How many days a week? How much per session? I'm curious about that.
Okay.
as someone who-
We were chatting before we got here. We did this. I think we probably have very different schedules because of the way the rest of our lives are organized at the moment. So, do you want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Or did you want to tell them about your?
No, you go, you go.
Okay. Right now, I'm fortunate right now that I'm writing full-time, which means that I have a contract to basically write a book a year. And so I know how long it takes me to type a first draft, to type 100,000 words, and then how much time it takes me to tear up all those words and put them back in better order and fix them all up. So I write every weekday, usually as well on weekends. I treat it as a job, which is exactly what it is. I mean, my publisher needs to have the book in so that they can, they can give me their edits. I can do it, multiple revisions if I need to. Then, they have to get it to the printer, et cetera, to bookstores to get it on the schedule. If I've got to write a book a year, I probably spend a couple of months researching, brainstorming, staring out the window, or like watching the Longhorns when I'm telling myself I'm really working by thinking of ideas. I spend now a couple of, at least 6 weeks, maybe 2 months writing an outline, and I do that every day, which is just really thinking through the major turns in the story. And then I sit down and after I get, input on that from my agent and editor, sit down and just start drafting the first draft, and that will take me 2 to 3 months. And that was the hardest thing for me to learn, that I could write a draft because it's a hot mess.
Yeah.
I used to spend, the first book I published, I probably spent 2 years writing the rough draft because I knew that I needed to be publishable, and I didn't know how to do that at the time. Then someone said that they could write a draft in 3 months. I said, you cannot do that. And they said, well, you can if you just sit down and write it. You don't sit down and fiddle over every single sentence, and when you come back the next day, go back and start fiddling over those same sentences again, so that after 3 months you've got 3 beautiful paragraphs and nothing else. So I just told myself, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this story from start to finish, and that's what I did.
Is that like 5 hours of writing, 6, 8, 3?
It can vary. It can vary
Put a little
from.
under
It can
20.
vary. Usually 3. So if it's depending on how close the deadline is getting, all those nice days of staring out the window suddenly look like a foolish dream, and you're still at the computer at 1 a.m. So it could be 2 hours. It could be 16. Get it done, revise, work on it again and again for months until finally they tell you that if you take any more time to revise it anymore, they're going to start charging you for any corrections because it's already gone to the printer.
So to make room for my day job, I get up at 4 every day. I write for about 3 or 4 hours, and that at between 7 and 8, I usually run home, take the world's quickest shower, and get dressed and take one of my kids to school, and then I'm a lawyer all day. So that's kind of the pattern. I do a lot of what Meg was saying. I try and get through the first draft. What usually happens to me is I get about halfway, and I've kept track of things that have gone wrong or things that I've screwed up. And at about halfway, that pile is way too big, and I'm sort of off track. So I back up, I revise that first half, blazing through it, trying to fix those issues, and then I just blaze to the end. And then if I can get to the end, that at that point you can revise it and make it better. But getting to the end is a big thing. If you don't finish, you never finish. Yeah. So.
I have a feeling if we want to have them take a look at our books,
Okay.
out of time.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for all your questions. I appreciate it.